history is a master of disguise. For centuries, we have been sold a dream of silk, incense, and star-crossed lovers. A magnificent century of romance and sweeping gazes. But step closer, past the velvet curtains, past the legends. Welcome to the harem. To the outside world, it was the house of happiness. To those within, it was a high-stakes laboratory of human survival. A place where a woman was a slave on Monday and the most powerful person on earth by Friday. But the price of that ascent? It was paid in blood, identity, and a silence so deep it has lasted 500 years. Tonight, we strip away the fiction. We are not looking at the jewels. We are looking at the scars. This is the anatomy of the real Ottoman Harem. The journey to the harem did not begin with a choice. It began with a tragedy. Most of the women who graced these halls were victims of the devshirm, or raids, captured from the wild steppes of Ukraine, the rugged mountains of the Caucasus, or the sun-drenched shores of the Mediterranean. They arrived at the Topkapi Palace as commodities, nameless, displaced, and terrified. But the moment they crossed the threshold of felicity, a clinical transformation began. Their past was surgically removed. Their names were erased. They were given new poetic titles like Gulbahar, Spring Rose, or Nurbanu, Lady of Light. This was not a den of leisure. It was a factory of human perfection. For years, these girls lived as ajamis, novices. They studied the Quran, Ottoman Turkish, Persian poetry, and the complex, lethal etiquette of the court. They learned how to walk without making a sound, how to speak without saying too much, and how to read the political mood of a room by the flicker of a single candle. Only the top 1% would ever catch the eye of the Sultan. The rest remained invisible, serving the higher-ranking women, waiting for a chance that might never come. It was a pyramid of power where the foundation was built on the broken memories of forgotten homelands. The harem was a sensory prison of extreme precision. Every morning began long before the first call to prayer echoed over the golden horn. The Hamam, the marble baths, were the heart of this subterranean world. Here, beneath domes pierced by stars of light, the air was thick with the scent of laurel soap, eucalyptus, and damp stone. But water was not just for washing, it was a ritual of status. A concubine's worth was measured in the smallest details: the softness of her skin, the clarity of her voice, and the ability to pour sherbet into a crystal chalice during a storm without spilling a single drop. These women lived in a state of constant, exhausting performance. Even in sleep, they were watched. The senior Kafes, the iron-fisted housekeepers of the harem, carried heavy keys and heavier gazes. They marked every mistake in a mental ledger. One slip in protocol, one disrespectful glance toward the Valid Sultan, and a girl could find herself scrubbed from the palace records, sent to the old palace to wither away in dusty obscurity. This was the silent war of the hallways, where a smile was often a mask for a desperate, calculating heart. Amidst the gold and the tulips, the most valuable skill wasn't beauty, it was endurance. In this sanctuary of women, there lived men who were no longer men, the Black Eunuchs. If the harem was a body, they were its nervous system. Castrated as boys and sold into the palace, they occupied a unique, haunting space in the hierarchy. Because they could not have families, the palace became their only reality, their only god. The chief Black Eunuch, the Kizlar Aga, was often the third most powerful man in the entire empire. He was the gatekeeper of the Sultan's private life. He managed the vast wealth that funded the harem's luxury, but he also managed its secrets. These men moved like shadows between the world of the Sultan and the world of the women. They were the architects of safety and the harbingers of death. They knew who was pregnant, who was plotting, and who was failing. When you hear of the whispers behind the lattice, you are hearing the voices of the eunuchs. They were the only bridge to the outside world, and their loyalty was bought with the price of their own futures. To cross a eunuch was to cross a ghost, and ghosts have no mercy. We must understand that the harem was never about love. It was about dynastic survival. The currency was not gold, but sons. Under the Ottoman one mother, one son rule, a woman's power was tied directly to her male child. If her son took the throne, she became the Valid Sultan, the Queen Mother, effectively the most powerful woman in the Islamic world. But there was a terrifying shadow over every cradle: the law of fratricide. To prevent civil war, a new sultan was legally encouraged to execute all his brothers. Every mother in the harem lived with a ticking clock. If your son did not win the race to the throne, he would be strangled with a silken cord. This created an atmosphere of lethal competition. Every bowl of soup could be poisoned. Every dark corner could hide an assassin. Mothers did not just raise children, they raised future emperors, training them in politics and paranoia from the age of 5. They were protectors, strategists, and sometimes executioners. The harem was a golden womb, yes, but for many, it was also a waiting room for a funeral. In the 16th century, a woman named Hurrem, Roxelana, shattered the machine. She was a slave who convinced Suleiman the Magnificent to marry her, breaking 300 years of tradition. She moved the harem into the heart of the government at Topkapi. After her, the Sultanate of Women began, a period where mothers and wives ruled the empire through weak or underage sultans. But this power came with a new kind of cruelty: the Kafes, or the cage. To stop the killing of brothers, the empire began locking princes in luxury apartments within the harem. They had gold, they had servants, they had concubines, but they could never leave. Some stayed there for 40 years. Imagine being taken from a room after 4 decades of isolation and being told you are now the shadow of God on earth. The harem, once a place of discipline, became a gilded prison that slowly suffocated the leadership of the empire. The women ruled because the men were broken. By 1924, the harem was empty. The last residents walked out into a modern world they did not recognize. Today, tourists walk these marble floors, taking photographs of the tiles and the fountains. But the walls of Topkapi remember a different reality. They remember that this was never a fairy tale. It was a place of incredible female agency in a world that gave women no rights. It was a place where slaves became queens, but also where children became prisoners of their own bloodline. As we look at the beautiful Iznik tiles and the golden lattices, we must ask ourselves, what would we give for absolute power? And what parts of ourselves would we be willing to lose to keep it? The harem was a mirror of the human soul, beautiful, complex, and deeply, deeply dangerous. I am Marcus, and this is Echoes of Empires.